The village of Ashvale sat at the edge of the Thornwood, a place where the old wars had left deep scars in the earth itself. Craters from siege weapons still dotted the hillsides like old wounds that never quite healed. The trees along the border grew twisted, as if the soil beneath them remembered the blood it had once swallowed. Most people who had survived the Thornwood War preferred not to live near it. Callum Drey was not most people. He had built his cabin on the highest ridge overlooking the wood, close enough to hear the wind move through the dark pines at night. Some of the villagers down in Ashvale thought he was mad. Others thought he simply wanted to keep watch, an old habit from 20 years of military service that his body couldn't quite unlearn. Both were probably right. Callum was 53 years old, broad across the shoulders in the way that men who have hauled heavy things their whole lives tend to be, with a gray beard that he trimmed only when his daughter complained about it. His left hand was missing 2 fingers, taken by a blade in the Battle of Hollow Ridge, and his right knee ached when rain was coming, which in this part of the world meant it ached most of the time. He walked with a slight lean, not quite a limp, more like a man who had learned to compensate for old damage so thoroughly that the compensation had become part of who he was. He had left the Imperial Army 14 years ago, after his wife Marin died of fever during the last winter of the war. He had taken his daughter, who was 3 years old at the time, and he had walked away from everything, his rank, his regiment, his pension, and come to Ashvale because Marin had once pointed to it on a map and said it looked peaceful. He had been trying to make it peaceful ever since. His daughter's name was Sora. She was 17 now, and she was nothing like him, which was the greatest relief of his life. Where Callum was quiet, Sora was loud. Where he was cautious, she was bold. Where he had spent 20 years learning to look at the world with suspicion, Sora looked at everything with a kind of fierce, unapologetic curiosity that sometimes made him want to grab her by the shoulders and explain, very carefully, all the ways the world could hurt her. He never did. Marin had been the same way, curious and unafraid, and he had learned a long time ago that trying to put walls around that kind of spirit was like trying to build a fence around sunlight. Sora worked 3 mornings a week at the village healer's shop, grinding herbs and changing poultices and asking questions that the old healer, Master Bren, sometimes couldn't answer. She was studying. She wanted to be a physician someday, a real one, trained at the academy in the capital, not just an herbalist. Callum had been quietly setting aside coins toward that dream for years, though he hadn't told her yet. In the evenings, she came home and cooked dinner, and they ate together at the small wooden table by the fire, and she told him about her day, and he told her very little about his. And it was quiet in the way that only 2 people who understand each other very well can be quiet. It was, Callum thought sometimes, a good life. A small life, maybe, but a good one. It was early autumn when everything changed. Callum had gone into the Thornwood before dawn to check his hunting traps. He ran a line of them along the eastern edge of the wood, mostly for rabbits and the occasional deer. The forest at that hour was cold and gray, the mist sitting low between the trees, the only sound the distant drip of dew from leaves. He found the first trap empty. The second had a rabbit in it, dead and frozen stiff. He pocketed it. The third trap was gone entirely. Chain, stake, everything. And the ground around where it had been was disturbed, the soil churned up, leaves scattered in a wide radius. He crouched and studied it. Something large had been here, something that had thrashed. He stood and followed the trail with his eyes. Broken branches, scuffed earth, and then, leading deeper into the wood, a smear of dark blood on the bark of a pine tree, at a height that made him pause. That was 8 feet off the ground. Callum had spent 2 decades fighting in the Thornwood War, which, despite its name, had not been fought primarily in the Thornwood. It had been fought on the open plains to the south, between the human kingdoms of the Imperial Alliance and the orc clans of the Greystone Mountains. He had seen orcs in battle many times. He knew exactly how tall they were. He followed the blood trail for another 20 minutes, moving carefully, one hand on the short hunting knife at his belt. Useless against something that size, but it made him feel better, until he came to a place where the trees opened into a small natural clearing. He stopped. There was an orc in the clearing. It was a male, young by the look of him, perhaps 20 in orc years, which put him somewhere around adolescence in human terms. He was enormous, easily 7 feet tall, with the broad gray-green skin and heavy jaw of the Greystone clans, his dark hair matted with dried blood. He was sitting with his back against a tree, one leg extended, and Callum could see immediately why he hadn't gone any further. His ankle was caught in an iron shackle, and the shackle was attached to a chain, and the chain was attached to a heavy iron stake that had been driven deep into the ground. Not Callum's trap. Something different. Something deliberate. The orc's wrists were also bound. Leather cords, tight enough to cut into the skin. His shirt, a rough-spun thing in the style of the mountain clans, was torn across one shoulder, and there was a deep gash there that had bled freely and then clotted badly. His eyes were open. He was watching Callum with the stillness of an animal that has learned very thoroughly that movement brings pain. They looked at each other for a long moment. Then the orc said, very quietly, in the common tongue, "Please." Just that one word. Callum stood absolutely still for another 10 seconds, his hands at his sides, doing what Marin used to call his thinking face, a deep stillness that she claimed looked, from the outside, like he had briefly ceased to exist. Then he walked into the clearing. "Who put you here?" Callum asked. He had crouched down to the orc's level, not close, not threatening, just low enough to make the conversation feel less like an interrogation. Old army habit. You got more truth out of frightened people when you weren't looming over them. The orc hesitated. His eyes tracked Callum's hands, his knife, the distance between them. Calculating. "Hunters," he said finally. "From the South Road." "Bounty hunters?" A pause, then a slight nod. Callum considered this. There had been a resurgence of bounty hunting in the years since the war. Men who made their living capturing orc stragglers and selling them to various parties who had various uses for them, none of those uses being good. It was technically illegal in the Empire, but the roads were long and the constables were few, and most people looked the other way. "What do they want you for?" The orc's jaw tightened. "My clan," he said. "They want to use me to find my clan." "Where is your clan?" "North." He didn't say more than that, and Callum didn't push. If the positions were reversed, he wouldn't say more than that either. "How long have you been out here?" 2 days. Callum looked at the shoulder wound again. 2 days, and the weather last night had been cold. The wound was red around the edges in a way he didn't like. "When are they coming back?" "Tonight," the orc said. "Or tomorrow." They went to the town for supplies. He paused. "For me." Callum understood what that meant. Rope. Chain. A cart, maybe. The things you needed to transport a large, unwilling prisoner. He looked at the stake. He looked at the shackle. He looked at the orc's face. Young, frightened, trying very hard not to look frightened. And he thought about a lot of things very quickly. He thought about the war. He thought about the things he had done in the war that he still couldn't talk about, even to himself, in the quiet hours of the night. He thought about Marin, who had died believing that the war was wrong and that the people who started it should be held accountable, and who had been right on both counts. He thought about what it meant to leave a living creature chained to a tree in the cold. Then he took out his hunting knife and cut the leather cords from the orc's wrists. The orc went very still. He stared at his hands, then at Callum. "I'm going to need something heavier for the shackle," Callum said. "I have tools at my cabin. Can you walk?" Another long pause. Then, "Why are you helping me?" Callum stood. His knee complained. He ignored it. "Finish that question later," he said. "Right now I need to know if you can walk." His name was Greth. Callum learned this during the slow half-mile walk from the clearing to the cabin, which took nearly 40 minutes because Greth's ankle was badly bruised under the shackle, and he had to stop every few minutes to let the pain subside. Callum walked beside him and didn't offer to help, because he had learned a long time ago that men who were used to being strong needed to be allowed to struggle with things themselves. "Greth," he repeated when the orc told him. "First name or family name?" "Clan name. My given name is Vrash." A pause. "Most humans can't say it." "Vrash," Callum said. The orc looked at him. Close enough. They made it to the cabin without seeing anyone. Sora was still asleep, or she was supposed to be, anyway. Callum led Greth around to the side of the cabin where the workshop was, a lean-to structure he'd built for woodworking and tool repair. He settled the orc onto a low bench, found his bolt cutters, and spent 10 minutes working on the shackle. It was a serious piece of iron. Professional quality. These hadn't been amateurs. While he worked, he heard the cabin door open. Sora appeared around the corner, hair unbraided, still in her sleeping clothes, with the expression on her face that meant she had heard something and come to investigate, and was now confronted with a situation she had not predicted. She stopped. She looked at Greth. Greth looked at her. Duh, she said carefully. Why is there an orc in the workshop? He was trapped in the Thornwood, Callum said, without looking up from the shackle. Bounty hunters. Sora processed this for approximately 3 seconds. Then she went back inside and came back with the healer's kit she kept on the shelf by the kitchen. A proper one, not a traveler's pouch, the kind that had clean bandages and gut thread for stitching, and a small pot of the drawing salve that Master Bryn had taught her to make. She sat down across from Greth and looked at his shoulder. That needs cleaning, she said. Can I? Greth looked at her with the same calculating wariness he'd turned on everything since Callum found him. Then, slowly, he nodded. Callum kept working on the shackle. The bolt cutters finally bit through on the third hard squeeze, and the iron fell away. From inside the workshop, he heard Sora say, I'm going to use this on the wound. It's going to sting. And then, a moment later, Greth's sharp intake of breath. And then Sora's voice, calm and professional. You did well. Hold still. The bounty hunters arrived the following afternoon. There were 3 of them, 2 men and a woman, all in the dark leather traveling gear that was the unofficial uniform of their trade. They came up the road from Ashvale, and they came to Callum's cabin because someone in the village had seen the orc on the ridge path the previous evening, and villages talk. Callum was sitting on his front steps when they arrived, as if he'd been expecting them, because he had been. The woman was apparently in charge. She was Callum's age, or close to it, with a hard face and the careful eyes of someone who spent a lot of time assessing threats. She had a crossbow at her hip. We're looking for something that belongs to us, she said. Nothing in these hills belongs to you, Callum said. We have a contract. I don't care about your contract. The woman's jaw tightened. You're harboring an orc fugitive. You understand what that means legally? I understand a lot of things legally, Callum said. He still hadn't stood up. I spent 20 years in the Imperial Army, 1st Thornwood Division. I know the statutes on prisoner treatment, bounty practice, and the unlawful detainment of non-combatants in post-conflict territories better than most magistrates. What you had chained in that forest was not a fugitive. He has committed no crime. Your contract is not with the Empire. I checked the registry this morning with the Ashvale constable, who, incidentally, is now aware of your presence here. He paused. I'd like you to leave. The 2 men behind the woman exchanged a look. This isn't over, she said. I know, Callum said. Most things aren't. They left. He sat on the steps for a while after they were gone, listening to his knee ache, watching the road. Then he went inside. Greth stayed for 3 days while his ankle healed enough to walk properly. It was, Callum discovered, an odd 3 days. Not uncomfortable, exactly. Just odd. The cabin had been built for 2 people. It was not large. Greth had to duck through every doorway, and the first time he sat in one of the kitchen chairs it simply ceased to exist as a functional piece of furniture, which made Sora laugh so hard that she had to put down her tea. Greth ate with them. He ate extraordinary quantities, which Callum respected. He spoke carefully and slowly in the common tongue, choosing his words with the precision of someone working in a second language, and he listened very carefully to everything that was said to him. On the second evening, while Sora was washing up and Callum was sitting by the fire with the cup of bitter tea that his knee made necessary, Greth answered the question that had been left unfinished in the forest. You asked why I wanted to know why you helped me, he said. Callum looked at him. And, my people have a word, Greth. He touched his own chest. It is my name. It means debt. Not money debt. Something deeper. When someone saves your life without reason, you carry them. He paused. My father saved a man in the war. A human soldier. He carried him off a burning field when everyone else was running. He never forgot that man. He talked about him until he died. Another pause. He said that man was the only human he had ever met who looked at him and saw a person. Callum looked into his tea. You looked at me the same way, Greth said. Callum was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I saw a lot of things in that war that I'm not proud of. Some of them I did. Some of them I ordered. Some of them I just watched. He turned the cup in his remaining fingers. I told myself after the war that if I got the chance to do something right, I would. Mostly I never got the chance. He looked up. You were the chance, he said. That's all. Greth nodded slowly. It was the nod of someone who understands something completely. On the 3rd morning, Sora came in from her morning walk to find Greth standing in the workshop, carefully repairing the fence rail that had been broken since spring. He had found the tools himself. He had found the spare lumber in the stack by the east wall. He was working with the slow, concentrated care of someone who takes craftsmanship seriously. She stood in the doorway and watched him for a minute. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," he said, without stopping. She leaned against the doorframe. "Where will you go? When you leave?" "North. Find my clan." He fitted the rail into the post notch and tested it with both hands. "They will have moved. But I know the signs. Are you worried they'll think something happened to you? They will know I was taken. They will be watching." A small pause. "My mother will be watching." Sora was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to give you some things for the road," she said. "Bandages, the salve, some dried food." She held up a hand before he could speak. "It's not charity. It's medicine. You're my patient until that shoulder is fully closed, and my patients don't leave without supplies." Greth looked at her. Then something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, because the musculature was different, but something warm. "You will be a very good healer," he said. She nodded, entirely unselfconsciously. "Yes," she said. "I will." He left at midday, when the sun was high enough to navigate by. Callum walked with him to the edge of the Thornwood. They stood at the tree-lean for a moment, the wind moving through the dark pines, the smell of earth and resin and old cold in the air. "The bounty hunters will follow you," Callum said. "I know. Can you handle them?" Greth looked at him. At full height, with his shoulder healed and his eyes clear, he was genuinely imposing, the kind of presence that rewrote your sense of scale when you stood next to it. "Yes," he said simply. Callum nodded. "Then go. Move fast for the first 2 days. Don't use the north road. Go through the Greywood and cut east to the river. They'll expect the road." Greth looked at him. "You know this terrain." "I fought over most of it," Callum said. 20 years ago." He paused. "It was somebody else's war. But I knew the ground." There was a long silence between them. Not uncomfortable. The silence of two people who have understood something together. "When you find your clan," Callum said, "tell your mother you're all right." Something moved across Greth's face. "I will," he said. And then, after a moment, "She will want to know who helped me. Tell her an old soldier with a bad knee. She will want a name." Callum was quiet. Then, "Callum Drey, 1st Thornwood Division. Retired." Greth repeated the name once, quietly, in a way that suggested he was committing it to something deeper than memory. Then he stepped into the trees. He moved soundlessly for something so large. Within 30 seconds, he had disappeared. Callum stood at the tree-lean for a while. The wind moved through the pines. Somewhere deep in the wood, a bird called out once and went silent. The old craters on the hillside to his left caught the noon light and made shadows that looked, if you squinted, almost like sleeping forms. He thought about the war. He thought about all the things the war had been about, officially and actually, and how wide the gap had been between those two things. He thought about young men who had followed orders into fields that other men had decided were worth dying in. He thought about a letter his wife had written him in the 4th year of the war, which he still had, which said, "Callum, I believe you are good. Please don't let them use that goodness for bad ends." He had let them, for a while, and then he had walked away. Maybe that was the best he could do. He turned and walked back toward the cabin. His knee ached. The sky was blue and enormous. Somewhere ahead, through the trees, he could see the smoke from his chimney rising in a thin, straight line, which meant Sora had put a kettle on. He had a daughter who was going to be a physician. He had a cabin on a ridge. He had, today, done something right. 3 weeks later, a package arrived at the cabin. No note. No sender's name. Just a package, left on the doorstep before dawn, wrapped in oilskin and tied with cord. Inside was a carved wooden box. The work was extraordinary. Intricate knotwork patterns of the kind that Callum recognized as Greystone Mountain style. Inside the box were 3 things: a small pouch of coins, a dried mountain flower of a kind that didn't grow south of the Thornwood, and a folded piece of rough paper. On the paper, in careful and unpracticed human letters, someone who had worked hard to write in a script that wasn't native to them, were 4 words. "The debt is remembered." Sora read it over his shoulder. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she reached over and picked up the mountain flower, turning it in her fingers. "What kind is this?" she asked. "I don't know," Callum said. "I'll ask Master Bren." She set it back carefully in the box. "He'll know." Callum closed the lid. He ran his thumb across the knotwork, the precise, patient work of hands that had taken their time. He thought of Greth in the forest, still and frightened, and saying that one word, please. He put the box on the shelf above the fireplace, between Marin's old book and the iron cup he'd carried through the whole war. It looked right there. It looked like it belonged.